Currently, there is quite a bit of misinformation when it comes to Tesla China, the way the Chinese government operates, and also the relations between Tesla and Nio and the government and so on. So in this video, I give you my personal opinion, nothing more, it's an opinion, on how I look at this as both a Tesla and a Nio shareholder. So I think a good start is to look at this piece, which is by Lynette Lopez, so that's from the Business Insider, and the title is "Beijing's campaign to rein in Tesla has begun. Now experts say it has limited time to sell cars before it gets cancelled." Now this article sits in a context where we have different news coming out of China, where Tesla is being accused, for instance, for sending data overseas. That's something which the Chinese government wants to curb. We see the pictures of the demonstration at Shanghai Auto Show. That has to do with the car braking issues and Tesla crashes. And then there are also some rumors about that Tesla cars are not allowed on certain streets in China anymore. So now this big conspiracy goes kind of that, well, the Chinese government has officially chosen their sides. They want the locals to succeed, and Tesla has limited time to sell their cars and at some point will kind of, well, lose China to the competitors. And frankly, I think that's not the case and that's not how it works. First off, it's interesting to note that this article is by Lynette Lopez, and she has been the one who previously claimed that Shanghai Gigafactory is not gonna happen, it's only a field of mud. She's got a big history of creating such kind of fear, uncertainty and doubt articles about Tesla. And actually, I remember quite well her first articles when back then I was still in China and visiting, for instance, the progress of the Gigafactory in Shanghai. And I could see with my own eyes that it's not reflecting anything what is going on the ground in China, what has been written in the media, for instance, like Business Insider. If I would have just listened to the media and see what they have written in those articles, I possibly would have bailed out of my investment, or in the first place wouldn't have never gotten into it. Okay, now let me try to explain what I personally think is happening. I don't think there is a media campaign by the Chinese government. I don't think the Chinese government has chosen sides. Yes, there are Tesla accidents. Yes, there are demonstrations against certain consumer rights issues. Yes, there are articles even by Chinese newspapers that are close to the Chinese government that are kind of concerned about what's going on there. And this leads people to think of that, well, there is kind of a bigger agenda behind it. And well, we've seen with Apple and Huawei, for instance, that Huawei has a bigger market share in China. Ultimately, you won't be able to win against those Chinese companies in China. And that's because Huawei is kind of supported by the Chinese government. And personally, I think that's not really the case. I think it's a misconception that everything is really top down in China and only the government decides and they pick their winners and then everything follows. I think it's rather that the Chinese government, of course, they make the rules for the country and then they are really keen on enforcing those rules. And frankly, they have really big accountability towards the Chinese consumers. And so I think the main agenda and what government officials have in their mind is accountability, responsibility, and making sure that the consumer issues are taken very serious. And now these things come together because there are issues with the Tesla cars in China. But the problem here is that people are confusing things. It's not the Tesla car that has the problem itself. It's just that things are happening, like people are kind of, confusing, for instance, the brake with the acceleration pedal. And then, with the instant torque of EVs, they may smash the car. And I've seen it on roads in China. I mean, there are some issues with unexperienced drivers. It can happen quite quickly. There is a different style of driving. You have issues around pedal-less driving, which might be confusing for new users. EVs in general are new. So in a population that is this big, you certainly have issues with someone making an accident, maybe not on purpose, but sometimes maybe just because they are misusing the product. So the initial problem is not with the product itself, but the Chinese consumer is always king. And so it's really not unusual to see Chinese consumer protesting against product failures, but also perceived problems with the product and so on, even though it's maybe not the fault of the original company. But in the end, that doesn't help. If the public opinion grows too big, then usually that's a thing that is kind of expected in China, that the company kind of apologizes for it and actually offers something in return. So for instance, the demonstrator here, she was hoping that Tesla would take back the car and kind of, reimburse her for that. Although that's ridiculous in the first place, but it's just a cultural thing, a phenomenon, and also coming from this bigger context that in China the consumer really is king, and is also stemming from a larger history of fake goods, consumer issues with products and so on. So the consumer is really, really strong in China. And I've noticed that myself from selling products from Germany into China. We also knew that the customer relationship is very different to what you see in the West. So it seems that, yes, there is a fundamental issue with, for instance, the crashes or Tesla cars recording footage in the streets and so on. And Tesla now needs kind of to find a way to abide to those rules and laws and localize to China. And I think this is the only thing that's really going on. I don't think clearly that any competitor is behind it. I don't think that the Chinese government is behind it. And I also have to say clearly that Tesla bulls who want to blame this on somebody else are also clearly wrong, because this is just in the hands of Tesla. They need to find a way of dealing with those local issues in China, and then they have all of the freedoms to operate and to become and be successful in China. For instance, on the Chinese government side, of course, Tesla has enjoyed various subsidies in China with the Shanghai government, particularly keen on getting Tesla on board, building the factory with them. So Tesla also enjoys lots of benefits in China. They also, of course, would enjoy some of the subsidies in China and so on. It's not that the government per se has something or an agenda against Tesla, in my point of view. And you also need to be aware that China is really, really big. So there are many local governments. And, one of the theses here is, for instance, that the Chinese government has now chosen Nio as the winner. And because Nio also receiving, for instance, local government funds or has an investment received by the Hefei local government, and also because Nio managed to get the subsidies for the battery swapping. But in my point of view, that's total rubbish, because, for instance, Nio, when they were in a period with all of the financial issues, they tried to get funding, for instance, from a local Beijing government, and they were denied. So if the central government in Beijing would have decided, well, we want to produce our local winner here, why wouldn't they have given Nio the money in the first place back then? Instead, Nio and Li Bin, they needed to find their financing somewhere, make a local deal, and in the end, that's with the local government, with Hefei. And still, Tesla enjoys all of the benefits with the local government in Shanghai. So that's the normal business, and it's nowhere top-down state-directed from the central government in Beijing, in my point of view. And that's also why I call bullshit on those articles that say that Nio is behind the protests of the Shanghai Auto Show, because the demonstrator who's protesting, she had a supplier badge from Webasto, one of the suppliers of Nio. But frankly, this supplier is so big. They make car classes and other stuff as well. And I'm pretty sure they even have a business relation with Tesla itself, but also definitely to many other car OEMs, also all of the legacy brands and so on. So it's clearly bullshit to say that, Nio would bring them into the Shanghai Auto Show in order to stage such kind of a protest. And so in general, I think it's really up to Tesla in order to find a way of dealing with those issues. And I see two ways how they're actually doing that already. So first, they have a big PR or government relations team already hired actually quite a couple of months ago. And I think that's super important in China in order to kind of build the governmental relations and the guanxi, which is kind of the interpersonal relationship that is important for trust building and business in the end. So that's one way of dealing with that. But of course, they also need to find their responses towards the customers that satisfy them. Of course, Tesla has some issues around their pricing policy. For instance, they're working with large rebates and so on. And Chinese users, although they really enjoy discounts and rebates and sales strategies like that, we see them on many e-commerce platforms. But on the other hand, they also create trouble because Chinese users will always be like, oh, somebody else got it for less than I got it. That's unfair. I'm going to protest against it. That's just a local thing, and Tesla needs to find their strategy and way towards that. And the second approach is the Tesla community. So Tesla has really a large crowd of followers in China, really strong, good brand image, and also Chinese consumers obviously stood up for Tesla and said like, well, our cars are braking fine, there's no issues with the car and so on. So this kind of community is also what Tesla needs to, support and keep up and going. And I have no doubts about it that they'll manage to do that, because I think Tesla has a brilliant Chinese management. But this just sums up the situation in which Tesla is. There's no way of blaming anyone in the government or competitors or so on. Tesla needs to find the local path. And there is stuff which they frankly have to do, which is in the first place to obey to the local rules and the local law. And that has, for instance, to do with the data collection, with the pricing strategies even some things about warranty and stuff like that, which they have totally to adhere to. And those rules might be differently enforced than, for instance, sometimes in the West. So I'm planning to do another video on the topic of autonomous driving between Tesla and Nio, for instance. And one of those aspects has actually also to do with that, because it's all about, for instance, how the data can be used and so on. And also about the legal structure, with Tesla being a wholly owned foreign enterprise in China, which is having some advantages, but also some major disadvantages. Also when it comes to Tesla's strategy towards full self-driving. So I would just take out a bit of steam, kind of critically think about those media articles. As I mentioned before, I don't see a bigger campaign against Tesla in China. I think China will embrace Tesla. They want Tesla to be successful. Actually, the local government in Shanghai has every means and every reason that they want Tesla to be successful. And so on the one hand, there are no excuses for Tesla on blaming this on somebody else. And on the other hand, there are also no reasons to believe that Tesla is facing something which they can't actually manage in China. So that's why I'm also quite comfortable with my position here with Tesla and not worried about what's happening in China. Also not worried about the interrelations between Nio and Tesla here. I don't think that the state will force either of them to be the main player and so on. It's all competition, playing by the rules, but without the emotions and without the fear, uncertainty and doubt articles. So I hope you enjoyed this views. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next one.